Thank you, Dave. Thank you all for coming today. The last time I was here, I managed to completely knock my PowerPoint offline, so hopefully some of the news I'm going to give you isn't the happiest news, but hopefully at least you can see it on our slides. Well, before I begin, I know a lot of you are very familiar with the PPIC statewide survey, but for those of you who aren't, I just want to say a few words about why we do this survey. It was started in 1998 by Mark Baltazari, who's the survey director. The goal was to provide timely, relevant, and nonpartisan data on the political, social, and economic opinions of Californians. The idea, of course, is to inform and improve state policymaking, raise awareness, and encourage discussion. And not only that, we like to provide a voice for all Californians, both voters and non-voters alike, in the state policy debates. Since the survey was started in 1998, we've interviewed over 250,000 Californians in more than 120 surveys. As Dave started to mention, this is the 5th survey that we've conducted on higher education, and the survey this year is conducted with funding from the James Irvine Foundation, and I'd just like to acknowledge Vince Stewart, who is here today from the James Irvine Foundation. We are extremely grateful for the funding to be able to continue this important series. This year we wanted to look at not only continue to track opinions about ratings of the system and funding concerns, but we also wanted to look at ways to raise revenues, planning for the future, and some attitudes about college more generally, how people view the importance of getting a college education, affordability and access issues. We wanted to pay special attention to the community colleges and ask some special questions of parents. This is a telephone survey. It was conducted from October 25th through November 8th. We interviewed about 2,500 California adults. And of that sample, we consider close to 1,200 to be likely voters, and that's based on some questions about past voting behavior, interest in politics, citizenship status, etc. And we also have just over 1,000 parents of children 18 or younger. And I'd also mention that for this survey, we also asked some questions about whether parents have kids attending one of the California public colleges and universities, whether they are attending one themselves, whether they're alumni of one. So we do have the opportunity to look at findings by some of those special groups as well. The survey has a margin of error of plus or minus 3.1% and larger for some of those special groups. I'd also like to mention that the surveys are conducted on both landline and cell phones and in 5 different languages: English, Spanish, Chinese, Korean, and Vietnamese. As many of you are aware, in each of our surveys, we do a statewide survey about once a month, and in each survey we ask Californians to give us their opinions of the state's elected officials. This is the first time that we've had the opportunity to ask about the way Governor Brown is handling the state's public college and university system. As you can see here, we find that Californians are more critical of the way the governor is handling the state's higher education system than they are of his job performance overall. And in fact, this slide is presented for those we consider likely to vote, and a majority actually say they disapprove of the way he's handling the higher education system. The reason we find this finding to be interesting is that often when we ask about job performance overall, the ratings of how the governor is handling a specific issue will sort of track with job performance overall, or many people will say they're unsure of how he's doing in a particular area. In this case, Californians have an opinion about the way he's handling the university system, and they're not happy about it. But this may not surprise you. They're even more critical of the way the state legislature is handling the public higher education system and the way that it's handling its job overall. 7 in 10 likely voters say they disapprove, and there's agreement across political parties. In the survey this year, we included a new question to try to gauge the general outlook of Californians about the state's higher education system. We find that 6 in 10 Californians say that the system is headed in the wrong direction, and majorities across political parties, regions, and most demographic groups agree with this assessment, although there is somewhat more optimism among those with less education, lower household incomes, and among Latinos. They're somewhat more likely than others to say that it's headed in the right direction. And overall, this is these attitudes, these pessimistic attitudes are sort of pervasive throughout our survey, and we'll get into some of these questions more as we go on. And as we just saw in the approval ratings, there are some doubts about how the state leaders are going to handle it. Each year we include some tracking questions in the survey to try to gauge perceptions about some of the overall conditions of the state's public colleges and universities. As you can see here, most Californians do not consider educational quality to be a big problem. They're much more likely to say that the overall affordability for students is a big problem. 6 in 10 hold that view, and that's up 8 points since 2007. And 7 in 10 consider the state budget situation to be a big problem for the higher education system. We also track ratings of the three branches of higher education. Sort of echoing those sentiments about overall quality, we find that majorities give positive ratings of excellent or good to all 3 branches, the community colleges, the CSUs, and the UCs. But we have seen some slight declines for the CSUs, 10 points since 2007, and for the UCs, down 8 points since 2007. So reflecting some of their concerns about the state budget situation and the effects on the higher education system, we find that 3 in 4 Californians say that the current level of state funding for the higher education system is not enough. And we find that majorities across parties agree with this assessment, but Democrats are the most likely to express this view. Since 2007, the share of Californians saying that funding levels are insufficient for the public colleges and universities is up 17 points. So they're definitely taking notice of the fact that there have been budget cuts for each of the branches. We also find, going along with that, 2 in 3 say that the public colleges and universities have been affected a lot by recent state budget cuts. So we also wanted to find out how do they feel about some of the specific measures that these schools are taking to make up for the decrease in state funding. We find that 2 in 3 Californians say they're very concerned about increasing tuition and fees for students. We do find that concern is higher among parents of students in these schools as well as among students themselves. We find that 55% are very concerned about these schools offering fewer classes. Again, this is higher among those with current direct experience with the system. And in fact, we were on a call yesterday with the Campaign for College Opportunity, and one of the attendees mentioned that there are a lot of students in the community college system having to actually try to get classes. They're going to they're going to more than one community college to try to get their classes. So it's not surprising that concern is fairly high about this issue. We also find that 53% are concerned about reduced admissions at the schools. As evidenced throughout the survey, we find that Californians greatly value the state's higher education system, and here again we find that 7 in 10 say that the state should be placing a high or very high priority on spending in this area. The share saying that the state should be placing a very high priority on spending for higher education has risen 15 points just since 2008. And we do find that across parties, majorities think that a high or very high priority should be placed on spending for the higher education system, but Democrats, not surprising, are the most likely to say that a very high priority should be placed there. Reflecting these priorities, we find that that overall, 6 in 10 Californians say that the state should be spending more money on higher education, even if it means less money for other programs. But Democrats are much more likely than Republicans to hold this view, although half of Republicans even share this sentiment. We wanted to find out if the state does make additional cuts in higher education, which looks highly likely given the recent revenue projections. What do Californians think the effect will be on quality? And we find that 2 in 3 think that quality will suffer. Just 1 in 3 think that the state could make additional cuts and maintain the same level of quality. Majorities of Democrats, independents, and likely voters think that educational quality will suffer, while Republicans are more divided. Half think it would suffer, half think that you could still maintain a high quality of education even if cuts are made. And I think this question really sort of speaks to some of the slight declines that we're seeing in ratings of the CSUs and UCs. As well as in our approval ratings of elected officials. In a separate question, we asked Californians to significantly improve quality. Do you think that the state just needs to increase funding, or do you think that they just need to use the existing funding more wisely, or do you think that both of those things are necessary? And we find that half of Californians say that both, they need to do both. They need to increase funding and use the funding more wisely. Just 1 in 3 say that using the funds more wisely would lead to quality, and far fewer, about 1 in 10, say that increasing funding alone would lead to improvements in quality. On that question, though, there is a partisan divide. Republicans are much more likely to think that greater efficiency would lead to quality. But despite some of these deep concerns about the fiscal situation, we do find that many Californians are unwilling to make sacrifices themselves just to maintain current funding for the public colleges and universities. So we find overall that 52% of adults would oppose paying higher taxes. Among likely voters, they are evenly divided. But not everybody is opposed to this idea. Voters are deeply divided along party lines. Nearly 2 in 3 Democrats would pay higher taxes, while 7 in 10 Republicans would oppose that idea. There is, however, widespread and much higher opposition to the idea of increasing student fees. This is a much more unpopular idea and something that appears likely to happen, certainly with the CSUs and likely with the UCs next fall. At least 6 in 10 across parties oppose this idea. And we did ask about a third specific proposal, which is, what do you think about the idea of increasing out-of-state admissions because those students pay higher tuition? We found that 52% of Californians would favor that idea, but support drops to only 20% if it meant fewer in-state students would be admitted. We do find one proposal that gets at least slight majority support. 58% of all adults and 52% of likely voters say they would vote yes if there was a bond measure on the 2012 state ballot to pay for construction projects in the higher education system. The percentage supporting this among likely voters is just higher than the simple majority threshold that would be needed to pass this type of measure. But still, this hypothetical idea does divide voters along party lines. And support for this type of idea was higher in 2007. Californians highly value the role of the higher education system in the state's, for the state's future. We find that 73% say that it's very important to the quality of life and economic vitality of the state over the next 20 years. And this has been similarly high each year. But as you can see here, about half of Californians anticipate a shortage of college-educated workers needed for the jobs and skills likely to be in demand in 20 years. We find that 13% believe there will be more than enough college-educated workers, and 32% say there will be just enough. As I'm sure many of you are aware, my colleague Hans Johnson has done some research and estimated that the state will face a shortage of 1 million college-educated workers by the year 2025. Across parties, we find that Democrats and independents are more likely than Republicans to anticipate a shortage. But when it comes to the state government actually planning for the future of the higher education system, we find that only 10% of Californians have a great deal of confidence in their ability to do so. 37% have only some, and half have very little or no confidence in the state government. The percentage saying that they have a great deal, if we combine those first two categories, we find 47% have at least some confidence in the state government to handle this, to handle the future of the system. But this is down 10 points since 2007, although it is somewhat higher. Last year was actually a low point in our surveys for expressing confidence in the state government. Only 40% at that time said they had a great deal or only some confidence. We find across parties that Democrats are much more likely to express at least some confidence as compared with Republicans and our decline to state voters. Next, I'd like to talk about some of the questions that were in the survey about general attitudes toward college and affordability and access issues. We found in the survey that Californians not only consider higher education to be important for the state's future, but they also consider it to be important for a person's own success in the workplace. 58% say that a college education is necessary for a person to be successful. 39% say that there are many other ways to be successful without a college education. Although a majority do express this view, this is the lowest that we've found in our surveys since 2007. We had, this was more in the 60s, the previous 4 years that we did this survey. We do find that across racial and ethnic groups, Latinos are much more likely to consider a college education to be necessary for success in today's work world. We also find 2 in 3 parents share this view. We had another question that asked Californians to think about the purpose of college. And this was a question we'd actually taken from a national Pew Research Center survey that they conducted in March. And the question was posed to them as, what do you think the main purpose of college should be? Should it be to gather the specific skills and knowledge necessary for the workplace, or should it be to grow personally and intellectually? We found that 46% of Californians think that gathering specific skills and knowledge for the workplace is the main goal, compared to 35% who said personal or intellectual growth. 18% volunteered that both of those were equally important. And I thought this question was sort of interesting. Well, first of all, Californians were very similar to adults nationwide in the Pew survey that they did in March. But also there were, across most groups, perhaps this is a sign of the times, but this is the first time we've asked the question, across parties, regions, and most demographic groups, people place the emphasis on skills and knowledge for the workplace, with a couple exceptions. College graduates were more likely to place some value on personal and intellectual growth, and across racial and ethnic groups, Asians were more likely to hold that view as well. Now, we've just talked about how important Californians think college is, but many see the price of college as a barrier to entry. There's widespread agreement about this across parties, regions, and demographic groups. And we find that in a question that's not shown here, 55% do think that there is financial aid and loans available to students who need it. And in fact, the lower income Californians and those with less education were actually more likely to think that financial aid is available for those who need it. But we do see that Californians think too much of that is coming from loans. 3 in 4 say that students have to borrow too much money to pay for their college education. Californians also think that access is a problem. 7 in 10 say that there are many qualified students who lack the opportunity to go to college. And we find that those with incomes household incomes under $80,000 and those with only some college education themselves or less are more likely to think that many students lack the opportunity to go to college. And we find that among parents, 7 in 10 think that many students lack the opportunity. We also found in a separate question that most Californians think that of students who do enter college, many are not prepared for college-level work. They think that they require some basic skills in remedial education. In thinking more about sort of these access issues and who attends college, we wanted to find out the importance Californians place on both racial and economic diversity. So when it comes to racial diversity, we find that 53% of Californians think that it's very important for the public colleges and universities to have a racially diverse student body. These findings are similar to earlier years, but the views vary pretty drastically by racial and ethnic group. African Americans are by far the most likely to consider racial diversity to be very important. We find a similar share of Californians think that economic diversity is very important, 54%. Again, those findings are similar to what we found in earlier years. Californians with lower household incomes are somewhat more likely to consider this very important. But I almost wish I had shown, again, the racial and ethnic findings, because we again find that 8 in 10 African Americans consider this to be very important compared to fewer Latinos, Asians, and whites. Now, we spoke a moment ago about this idea of preparedness. We wanted to include a couple questions about the role of California's K-12 public schools in getting students ready for college. We find that the vast majority, 86% of Californians, think that it's essential for the K-12 public schools to be preparing students for college. But fewer than half think that they're doing an excellent or good job in that area. And these are questions we typically ask in our annual K-12 survey, which we do every spring. And these findings about the school's performance in this area have been similar over time. So as you all know, the community colleges really serve the bulk of students in the state, over 2.9 million, and they serve a variety of important functions. We wanted to find out what Californians think about them including career technical or vocational education in their curriculum. 7 in 10 consider this very important, and we find majorities across groups consider it very important, although this finding was somewhat lower among Asians. We also found in another question that a similarly high share said that it's very important for these schools to be preparing students to transfer to four-year institutions. We also did ask, given the variety of functions that the California community colleges have to serve, we asked a question about what Californians think is the primary goal of the community colleges. We found that plurality, although it was only 35%, think that preparing students to transfer to four-year institutions should be the primary goal. 29% said career technical or vocational education. 17% said providing classes for lifelong learning or personal enrichment. And then about 1 in 10 said either providing basic skills or remedial education or providing associate degrees. And as we just learned a moment ago, most Californians think that many students require remedial education, but they don't really want this to be the primary goal of the state's community colleges. So we wanted to find out if Californians think having a 2-year degree is going to help a person's success in today's work world. They certainly see a place for it. We find the vast majority say that a 2-year degree can help at least some with a person's success in the work world. But just 45% say that a 2-year degree can help a lot. And there are some key differences by racial and ethnic group. As you can see here, a majority of Latinos think that a 2-year degree can help a person a lot. And we find that across income groups and across education groups, the percentage saying that a two-year degree can help a lot declines as you move up the income and education scales. And perhaps some of these attitudes can be explained by this question. The vast majority of parents would like their own children to achieve a 4-year degree or a graduate degree after college. Just 10% would like them to achieve at most a 2-year degree or technical training, and only 3% say that at most they want their child to achieve a high school diploma or less. We've been asking this question since, I think, 2005, and we've always found that the vast majority of parents want their children to achieve a 4-year or graduate degree. And what was sort of interesting about this question, though, and perhaps reflects this idea that parents want their children to do better than they've done, we find that, for example, those who have graduated from college themselves are more likely to want their children to get a graduate degree, whereas those with less education want them to at least achieve the 4-year degree. We also find that white parents are much more likely to hope for the graduate degree, Latino parents more likely to hope for the 4-year degree. But despite these high aspirations for their children, about half of Californians are very worried about affording a college education for their child, and nearly all parents are at least somewhat worried about affording college. But you can see that there are some stark differences across racial and ethnic group and by income level. For our group of parents, we didn't have enough sample to break out Asian parents or African Americans parents separately because the margins of error would simply be too high. But in any case, you can see that Latino parents are far more likely than white parents to be very worried about affording college, and those with lower household incomes are much more likely to be very worried. In a third question, special question for parents, we found that just 1 in 3 parents say that they're very confident that they have the resources and information needed to help their child achieve the desired educational level. And the percentage of parents who are very confident in their own resources and information has declined significantly since 2005, from 56% to 32% today. Okay, so I'd just like to sort of wrap up some of the themes that emerged from the survey, and then Dave and I are happy to take questions. We found that amid concerns about state budget cuts, most say that the state's public higher education system is headed in the wrong direction. They're much more critical of the governor's handling of the system than they are of his job overall, but they're even more critical of the state legislature. We don't see huge concerns right now about educational quality, and we do see positive ratings of the 3 branches, but the ratings of the UCs and CSUs have declined somewhat since 2007. Californians are increasingly likely to consider higher education spending a top priority, but voters are divided about paying higher taxes, and there's widespread opposition to increasing student fees. Californians do view college as necessary for success in life, just as they view the higher education system as very important to the state's future, but many believe that there are qualified candidates who lack the opportunity to go. And as I just mentioned, most parents want their children to go to college, but they are worried about affording this cost. And I'll just briefly mention, if you follow the PPIC statewide survey, we'll be conducting another survey next month that's focused on state and national governance issues, including some questions about the state budget. January will be focusing almost exclusively on the state budget and the governor's budget proposal for the next fiscal year. And in March, we'll be coming back to our state and national issues and taking a look at the 2012 elections. Let's see, there was one thing I wanted to mention before I forget. Dave mentioned that these slides are online. We also have an interactive tool if you're interested in running any of these questions by some of the various demographic, political, or regional subgroups. You can go online and look at our interactive tools. It's pretty easy. You just select the topic you're interested in, followed by the question you want to look at, and then the group you want to look at, whether it's by gender, income, education level, and you can run those yourselves. It creates nice charts and everything. So thank you very much.